Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm bringing you a special episode of the Bokeh podcast today called Workflow Wednesday. During these special edition episodes, myself and my co-hosts will focus on helping you develop more efficient daily and weekly workflows around post-production, communication, task and project management, time management, file and image management, and yes, the list does go on. We're going to save you an incredible amount of time in your work week, and we promise not to be too nerdy. This podcast is brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.
All right, we are officially live. Thank you everybody for joining us, both on Facebook Live and then also at the Bokeh Podcast, BOKEH podcast.com. And we push these episodes out every Wednesday. This is Workflow Wednesday. I'm here with my friends, Rich and Heather and Haley. Hello. To you guys.
Hey.
And I said that we'd catch up with the small talk here once we got started, because I like to do that with everybody on air. But before we do that, just for context for everybody, the Workflow Wednesday series is something that Photographer's Edit puts on for the very purpose of focusing on the topic of workflow, which is something that literally every photography business owner is carrying out on a day-to-day basis. We want to explore how to have more efficient workflows, how to get things done more efficiently so that we have more freedom, more flexibility in our life as photography business owners. So that's the focus of this podcast. It's a lot more exciting than for me to be talking on air on my own, to have my friends Rich and Heather and Haley. Haley, of course, also works with Photographer's Edit, heads up our digital marketing and the podcast effort there. And so we get to chat about something that may seem a little bit nerdy, but it's ultimately applicable to any and every photography business owner out there. So before we get into the topic this week, and this is actually going to be a part 2 about how to be more productive working from home. Mm-hmm. Rich and Heather, you guys just got back from vacation, right?
Yes. We did 2 weeks in Fort Lauderdale and being with family. And it's just kind of our annual way to get away and have some new adventures and just have some good family time away from home. So it's our home away from home.
Yes, I feel more alive.
Yeah.
We needed it.
I noticed the beautiful color that you got there from being on the beach.
No, I'm not sure what you're saying. I spent maybe
very little time
an hour at a cloudy beach, and so it must be the camera.
Well, before we actually talk about working from home, I want to talk a little bit about how you guys managed to even create the space necessary to be able to go on a trip for a week and a half, 2 weeks. In the middle of summer, which is traditionally anyway, has been kind of the busy season for wedding photographers, which is your all's specialty. Mm-hmm. Talk just briefly about that. How do you create that space? How do you maintain the business, I guess, in such a way that your clients don't feel like they're totally out of touch with you? How do you manage incoming potential new business while also separating yourselves from work enough to actually get a break?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question.
That's a great question.
Because we shot 5 weddings in May and then another 4 or 5 in June. And so this was insane. This was actually, we left at the very end of June first, and we're gone for the first 2 weeks of July. And there's this really great company called Photographer's Edit. that allows
shameless plug. Thank you very much for that.
I'm serious, guys.
Oh, I'm totally
it's
serious.
How we're able to get away for 2 weeks in the summer when we've just shot multiple weddings. And I think that what we're learning, the longer we're in business is we try to wake up every day with our business and say, who are we going to make happy today? And so the goal is, if a wedding client doesn't have their wedding images yet, we're at least communicating with them about where we are in that process, and so they're hearing from us, they're being touched base with, they know what to expect and when to expect it. So, Rich can go, and I will say for myself, I didn't do very much work at all while we were down there, but Rich maintained emailing. He would get a little bit here and there.
A little bit here and there.
But clients knew.
I like the hesitation.
The clients who didn't already have their wedding photos, their full galleries before we left, were at least being communicated with while we were down there.
That's the biggest thing. First of all, I had to turn down several weddings because the first couple weeks in July, we just know every year first 2 weeks in July and the last several weeks in December, I got an inquiry for a January 1st wedding. That's an automatic. I'm not going to be here, just like, I'm going to refer to someone else. And, so first of all, we just had to, man, I don't want to skip that.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we're going to talk about today directly pertains to the question that you're asking us. And so we're going to kind of go into that in just a couple minutes. It's definitely, we wanted to start today's conversation with a couple of philosophical points and then move into a couple really practical points that we use for our business.
I always love that because I think it's easy, and we've probably talked about this on Workflow Wednesday and certainly on the podcast before, but it's easy to get caught up in the tools and the kind of the next actions. And if we don't have a baseline philosophy that drives it, it's easy to get lost and then jump from one tool to the next. Never really actually get anything done. So I like that we're going to go there. I will ask you one more question about this though. When you, so you're away for, what was it, about 10 days, close to 2 weeks?
No, it was 2 full weeks.
It was 2 full weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
So what would you say in that time frame, how much time did you actually have to spend in anything work related?
Very little.
Because I mean, like the vast majority of, after shooting a wedding is editing. And again, we send everything to photographers edit. And so so the only thing I had to really maintain was basically inquiries or emails. And obviously, if you just spend, 15 minutes a day, you can kind of do that. So for me, like when my wife and her mom wanted to watch a Hallmark movie, I'm like, I'm see you guys later.
Come on.
Oh man. So I watched one with her,
a Hallmark movie. That's funny. You don't even hear that phrase anymore. Now it's just everything's Netflix, but a Hallmark movie. Okay.
What was the movie we watched? All About Me or more?
It was It was James Marsden and Michelle Monaghan. So it's a modern movie.
All of Me?
The Best of Me.
Best of Me.
Oh my gosh. I love that movie. I cried so hard through the whole thing.
These girls have seen it like 5-6 times and they're still crying.
No, I've only seen it once and I won't watch it again. I cried too hard the first time.
Oh my gosh. I knew exactly what was going to happen. It's so predictable. But anyway. Hey, what can you do? So
I will say though that when we go on vacation for 2 weeks, we're not in an active, proactive, moving our business forward mode. We're in maintaining mode. So we've gotten the pieces in place. We've gotten we basically work up until leaving for vacation. Like we set goals for ourselves and we reach these certain amount of goals. And then we feel like, okay, now we can relax. We can go on vacation. We can set an auto reply out of message email for our clients. And then if anything, if a client needs a phone call or an email, Rich will be engaged enough to respond and handle that. But we're not spending a tremendous amount of time on the business when we're down there.
And I like too that Rich, you mentioned only taking 15 minutes a day to jump in there and answer those emails. I think there's a tendency for photographers to really get caught up in the email game. And really, this is a conversation for another day. And we've touched on communication before, and I'm sure we'll get into it in future episodes. But if you've got a good system in place for managing communication, email doesn't have to be this 2-3 hour a day process that I hear some photographers kind of alluding to. If you've got quick keyboard shortcuts set up and maybe even template responses set up, it's easy to copy and paste that stuff in there and shoot off a quick few emails and be done.
Yeah, a lot of times people will use their email as basically their to-do list. But for me, if a client said, email me that was a task longer than, 30 minutes, like designing an album, I just basically let them know, hey, I'm on vacation. I'll get back. I'll get to this once I get back. And their response always is, hey, no rush. Just, enjoy your time at the beach, like they all understand, And so it was basically it was pretty simple. So we everything we do, we make decisions based upon freedom. We want. That's why. Could I have a faster computer? Yeah, but I much rather have a MacBook Pro that for the I could just so I
the
could
flexibility
work,
of it.
Yeah, I can work anywhere.
Yep.
And so like to the softwares we use to from QuickBooks Online, everything's portable. Everything's portable.
Although I will say, for all of us tech geeks out there, I don't know if you saw this announcement, Rich, but Apple just announced the latest version of their MacBook Pro, and you're going to be able to upgrade up to 32 gig worth of RAM. So if you need more processing power, the option is there, and you can maintain the laptop. I
don't need more processing power. I got someone editing my photos for me. I mean, why do you need that much processing power unless you're doing like graphical stuff, like 3D rendering or editing photos in Lightroom? Bam, you just don't need it.
I like how you think.
Like photographers edit saves money on the other end too. You don't have to get this very expensive gear. Instead of buying the $5,000 computer, you can use that money to have freedom in your, you're welcome. You're welcome. You can even go that route.
Photographersedit.com for those who
exactly.
We'll make sure to pop this back up on the screen so you can see it as well. Thanks for that plug there, Rich. But we actually had a first part of this episode, how to be more productive while working at home. Haylee and I kind of tackled the subject initially. Rich and Heather were out on that day. And so I want to kind of defer to them and let them be the center of attention today in this topic about how to be more productive from home. And I'm just going to let you guys take it away.
Okay, cool. So I did notice, I listened to the video that you guys did last week, and it was so great.
It was beautiful.
And the wheels were turning as I listened to you guys talk, because you made some really great points. And one thing that I noticed is that the words motivation and productivity both came up. How to be more motivated while working from home and how to be more productive while working from home. And while I don't think that those words are interchangeable, I do think that they're both super relevant to this conversation. And so for me, for Rich and I, we've been full-time professional photographers with no other source of income for quite some time now. I realize that in this area, maybe, I don't know if it's the Chattanooga demographic or if this is a broader perspective of the industry right now, but there are a ton of photographers who are using photography as a hobby or a side hustle or an additional source of income, those kinds of things. But for us,
Heather, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just going to jump in really quick here to give you guys a plug, give Haylee a plug here too. I'm going to put your websites up on the screen here so that everybody listening in, for those who are listening and who don't normally listen to the show, you're like, who are these people that feel like they can talk to me about running my photography business? Sure, you check out richsmithphotography.com, Rich and Heather Smith there. And then Haylee, Haylee, there we go. I thought I had your website typed up ahead of time, HayleeGaffin.com. Haley's a photographer in addition to doing marketing work for Photographers Edit. So make sure you check out both of their websites. I shot weddings for about 10 years. I'm not currently shooting, but that's a little bit of context for this conversation at hand here. But Heather and Rich, back to you guys.
Yeah. So when we talk about the aspect of motivation, when you've quit any other jobs and you're relying on your performance and ability in a business as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, that in and of itself is inherently motivating because we haven't given ourselves an out. We haven't given ourselves like we have this other job that we'd like to do on the back burner. It's like, this is what
do or die.
It's do or die, like the rubber meets the road. And so philosophically, like when we talk about motivation and staying motivated, well, a really good way to do that is to go full time.
Jump in the deep end.
Yeah.
Sink or swim.
That's really interesting. And it's interesting how that holds true across the board, I think, in life in general. I mean, we live in this culture where we have endless choices, right? Endless options. Mm-hmm. And this carries over to the relationship world. This carries over. I'm an endless purchaser of motorcycles, it seems.
And no one has noticed.
And it's easy to get carried away with that. But what I find interesting is that the moment that, as you're alluding to, that you commit to something to the fullest extent, it's amazing the amount of focus that you bring to that. And then in this case, the survival mode kind of kicks in, right? If you don't have any other source or significant source of income, your photography business is it. It just naturally lights a fire underneath you.
For sure.
Yeah, totally.
And it keeps you motivated, and it keeps you striving to do better and to be always improving. And I think that's a key for us as business owners that kind of is underlying everything that we do. We always want to be better, and there's always room for improvement. Another aspect that is more philosophical or conceptual in nature that has to do with working from home and running a business is that
something I'm very familiar with
is that failure is motivating. It keeps, again, along with
Oh yeah, I learned so much more. I learned so much more in my failures than I do by my successes. So a lot of times I'm so focused on my business that I'm so close to my business I don't get a far away view of my business, and so sometimes a client will something will fail. A client will be disappointed, and so. We're not immune to that. And so, but that definitely kind of like allows us to,
reevaluate and stay motivated and keep our eye,
we've learned a lot through mistakes, especially Heather's mistakes.
Well, but this is a really interesting point, and I find fascinating. I'm certainly, I'll raise my hand, guilty of not making moves forward in business or in life because of my fear of, we can call it failure or mistakes or it not being perfect. And again, we're lucky enough to live in a culture where we have so many different options and we have these kind of cushy lifestyle for the most part. And there is a tendency to kind of hold back for fear of messing that up in any way. And so an openness to being willing to, I guess, take a chance ultimately, not being 100% sure whether or not something's going to pan out. You do the research at a time, you plan, you put the systems in place and the tools in place, but you're not 100% sure that thing's going to work out. It's okay to take a chance, take that risk, and understand that, I mean, when we say failure, it's kind of a black and white concept, right? There's a possibility that we may at least have to course correct, but we have to be okay with that notion because a lot of times the fear of failure can actually get in the way of motivation. So it's interesting. There's kind of a dichotomy. There's a need to push forward because we know if we don't, we're going to put ourselves in a pretty bad place, especially if this is our sole income. But then the flip side of that is we have to be willing to take a risk to go beyond that fear of failure in order to take our business to the next level.
Yeah. And even if we have a very successful business that's moving forward and we have a 95 or 99% success rate as far as thrilled, happy clients, it's those small failures along the way within the context of a successful business that are the failures that we're talking about here. And I don't like the phrase, you can't please everybody. I don't like it because I want to be able to please everybody all the time. And particularly in business, you want to be able to please everybody all the time. But what we've learned is that those little failures along the way remind us and alert us, and they wake us up to the fact that the concept of we always want to be improving, and how can we do that? And how can we run our business like a well-oiled machine and still being, incredibly personal and human, so it's just something that when we talk about the word motivation, those are things that kind of are, keep us going and keep us wanting to improve and work hard.
Yeah, and this is good food for thought. The other thing, and maybe we brought this up a couple of weeks ago when Haylee and I did the first part of this series, but I think there's something to bring up, which is when we talk about the idea of motivation, there's a lot of conversation in our industry in particular, I'm sure elsewhere as well, but about this idea of motivation and more specifically the notion of inspiration. A lot of photographers wait to act or to do until they're, quote, inspired. And I get the thought process there. I mean, we're talking about photography, which at its root is an artistic process.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, probably 90% of what we do, or 80 to 90% of what we do, is run a business, running a photography business. And the reality is maybe not every single piece of running a business is enjoyable per se. It's not necessarily inspirational. But we just have to simply do it. And this idea that we're going to feel inspired and passionate about literally everything that we do, I think is this first world mentality that is actually a hindrance to doing well in business. So I just wanted to throw that out there, at least as food for thought. You guys have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's very well said and so incredibly true. Not every aspect of what we do is artistic. And so I think that we've moved from thinking along not that you can't be a business person and an artist or a creative. Those things are not mutually exclusive. I think that's a really important point to make. Wanting to grow our businesses and run better businesses does not mean that we have to sacrifice the artistic or the creative side of what it is that we're doing. So I think that's really well said.
Well, and Haylee, you've been quiet over there. I'd love to hear from you too. Any thoughts to add there?
She's trying to jump in.
Sorry,
Haylee. No, it's all good. I actually had a question because I never took my photography business full time. And I know even in our local market, there are tons of photographers that are using it. It's their side hustle. And their goal is to one day be a full-time photographer. But so many just don't know how to take the leap without risking it all. Like you said, do or die. But do you have a tip for like just one big tip for photographers who are ready to make the jump, but they just need to prepare?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you said that because we made it sound like we jumped from working full-time jobs directly into running a full-time business with no transition period. And that's not true. We transitioned gradually over a period of time because we didn't want to make stupid financial decisions. So, and we have 2 kids, so Rich actually was working. He went from full-time down to part-time at his, at the job that he was working, as an AutoCAD draftsman at an engineering company, which he hated, before we went full-time photography. So there was definitely
don't be too impressed.
We are not risk takers. We are not. I mean, I might have made it sound that way when I was talking earlier about how motivating it is to have no other source of income, but it was a gradual transition, and I would recommend that for people to have your ducks in a row, obviously. And
one big thing is get your finances in check. I mean, like for us, like when we were always so, when money came in, we spent it. And then like running a photography business, you'll quickly realize that like you have a period of time where you get lots and lots of money, and then you'll like it just goes in waves. Like a business will be really good, and then then you'll get no inquiries and no bookings for a while, and then and that tendency is like, okay, spent and now we book lots of weddings, but we kind of put it into the bank because we know that there's going to be lean times. We got to prepare for the lean times as well.
Yeah.
So
I'll jump in on that too. I think when it comes to the idea of planning on going full time, and this is something we've talked about on the podcast before, but it's really important to understand kind of the bigger picture view, right? This is a phrase that I use quite a bit, but part of that so-called big picture view doesn't just have to do with long-term personal goals and then how that translates to a business model, but also the financial piece, understanding what bills you need to pay, what you want to be putting into savings and in investments, and then how much money you need every year to go on ideally 2 or 3 vacations. Rich and Heather, I know you guys prioritize that and actively. So this is not those numbers, and Haylee, and I'm not saying this specifically to you. I know you get these concepts, but to the listeners at large, these numbers are not an overly complicated concept or principle. If you're trying to figure out, hey, can I go full time? You need to very clearly understand the numbers behind those 3 principles: how much your bills are going to cost on a monthly basis, how much you want to be putting away into savings and investments, and then how much money you need for, we'll call it play money. Hopefully much of that is geared toward experiences where, especially if you've got kids or a partner otherwise, or if you're on your own, that you want to go experience life outside of the little box that you live on 95% of the time, then you need to prioritize setting money aside for that. Those numbers are very black and white, and you can use that as a gauge to then figure out, okay, is my business model going to support that in the same way that my current job does?
Right.
And then it's just a matter of probably to Rich and Heather's point, building up to that place where maybe you're shooting part-time 10, 15, 20 weddings a year, maybe 50 portrait sessions a year, whatever it might be, where you've got a good momentum, your brand is being established, you got some recognition in the community, and at that point you're able to kind of take that leap. I was forced into it when I went full-time. Maybe I mentioned this story on the podcast before, but I was working in the optics industry. And there was some dishonesty going on in a practice that I was working at, that I was employed at. And I called the owners on it, and they didn't like being called on that. And so it was essentially me saying, all right, give me my last check. I'm out. And I I went home and I told my partner at the time, I'm going full-time in photography.
Surprise!
Surprise, yeah. And we were in a situation, luckily, that where she was providing a secondary income or an additional income. And so it was there to kind of supplement what we were doing in the photography business. But we've been shooting for a bit, generating significant or a decent amount of income through the photography business. And it just made sense at that point to go all in.
Yeah.
So
and that's actually, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say that this conversation about priorities and schedule finances and transitioning into full time, this actually is a really good segue into our next point, which is time blocking helps us to obviously, and you guys mentioned this last week and did a great job of covering it. And I just wanted to add that Rich and I have begun to really view time blocking as something that allows us the opportunity to schedule our values, which is something that as this would apply to anybody, not just someone running their own business, but what are the things that, you know, the average person wishes that they had time for or wants to do more of and yet doesn't, or maybe haven't figured out how to do that yet. Mm-hmm. And we've really been having this conversation quite a bit lately about scheduling our values. What is important to us? Is it having a big house and a car that impresses people? For us, the answers to those things are no. So what is important to us is having margin, having some freedom and flexibility in our finances, which for us means living below our means. We're not going to impress anybody with our house. No one's going to be impressed by our cars. And that's completely okay with us because we would much rather take our kids on vacations and have experiences. And so when we talk about time blocking, we're not just talking about scheduling our day. We're talking about scheduling our life and our priorities, you know, making time for 2 weeks in Fort Lauderdale or Alaska next year. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so people complain, I don't have enough time for, you know, I wish I could spend more time with my family or could spend more, you know, this kind of stuff, but they never put it on their calendar, like literally put it on their calendar and then schedule everything around it. And so like they say, so our priorities is, all right, on Friday night, we're going to have a family movie night or we're going to spend time with the kids, and like nothing goes in that spot. Okay. And then everything else is scheduled around it, you know, evening times are for this or this is for that. And because we want to have amazing kids I want our kids to know that their parents love them, and we want, you know, I want my wife to know that I love her, I prioritize her. And so, and to do that,
Heather, just so you know.
Yeah. You're awesome, sweetheart. Okay. And so, but yeah, I mean, but to do that, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional because a lot of people, it's just like, I wish I could, but like, just get out your calendar, put it on the calendar and do it. And so that's for us, we time block, but we also time block by scheduling our values as well. And
that's good. And I think, Rich, you actually texted me this the other day, but basically you said people make time for what is actually important to them. Because the phrase that you hear all the time in the photo industry is, I'm busy. Or the thing that kills me is well, we'll see. Or I'll get to that. We'll see what is happening around that time, rather than just making a commitment, as you're saying, put it in the calendar. But taking a step back and touching on the idea of philosophy, Heather, that you were emphasizing earlier, again, going to this big picture view idea, literally everything in our life, if we create a set of personal values that drive what we do, not just on a personal level, but in the way that we run our business, the business model that we set up. And then, of course, that translates to the clients that we're going after and what we're charging, and then ultimately the money that we're making. All of these things are driven by, or ideally driven by, a set of values that very clearly define the way that we live and that we run our business. And instead of kind of being in that reactive state, which again, a lot of the photography industry, you hear them talking about this. I don't have time. I'm overwhelmed. I'm up editing at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's because of that kind of reactive tendency that they have toward life, versus very clearly establishing a values and letting everything else fall underneath that. And the moment that you do that, it's not that life becomes suddenly this, kind of perfect or perfection, the perfect notion of productivity and everything else, but it's going to be so much more I guess it's going to be a lot easier ultimately to create the freedom, the flexibility that I hope we all started a photography business for in the first place. I mean, who wants to go into business for themselves and then work 80 hours a week? That kind of defeats the purpose. So being very clear about your values enables you to be able to very proactively live out your life personally, professionally, and do the very things that you guys are talking about. So I love that you make that point.
Awesome. And I love what you said last week about having a schedule, but also having variety, and how those two things can live together. That duality is beautiful because you are taking charge of your day and time blocking and scheduling, but you also have the freedom and the flexibility, which is what makes this whole thing so beautiful in the first place, of going on a bike ride for an hour to clear your head, or we are off to Dollywood for the day, whatever it might be, again, scheduling your values. So I think that that's a practical, but also conceptual thing that, anyway.
I need a motorcycle to clear my
head.
Oh,
boy.
I was going to say,
I need to clear my head.
Dollywood, riding a motorcycle.
Family time versus me by myself.
Hey, we have to have some of both, right?
It's so true.
I got to clear my head.
It's so true.
Clear my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Rich, we're going to get you on a motorcycle sooner than later. So
thanks, buddy.
I'm going to keep us on track.
Yeah. Next time you get a new motorcycle, Nathan, just don't sell your old one.
Just sell it to him. Yeah.
Don't let me borrow it. That's even better.
So the next thing that we wanted to talk about was know when to work off site. We all know how many distractions, and you guys touched on this last week, but that's a huge component of this for us as well and Haylee, you mentioned having a dedicated workspace at your home. We actually don't have that luxury. We've got 2 kids. They're actually, they each have a bedroom, and technically, if we wanted to get rid of we basically have a small 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom house. And again, we've chosen because of our priorities, we've chosen to stay in this house.
Oh yeah.
It's been a conscious decision. Could it be more convenient to buy a bigger house and have extra rooms where we have a dedicated office space? It really could, but it would conflict with our priorities in terms of margin and financial freedom and travel and all that.
Or being stress-free.
Yeah. Stress is a big thing. We don't want to be house poor. So with those 3 bedrooms, we actually do not have a dedicated workspace. We have a guest bedroom. We have 2 kids in bunk beds in one room, and we have our master. So with that said, while it is ideal to have a dedicated workspace, we don't, and we've made it work. And I feel like we're pretty resourceful. You know what I mean? We've learned to kind of know when we can work effectively at home, and when we need to leave the house and work off site.
Yeah.
And we've learned to be comfortable working in both of those environments. And so I do think there's things that are easier to do at home when you have more focused, quiet time and fewer distractions. I know, Haylee, you've talked about being at a coffee shop and working, and someone comes up and says hi, and then you end up in a conversation that you weren't anticipating. So there are some challenges to working off site.
That's never happened to us.
Never.
We found these.
It happened to you. It happened with you.
I know.
So I think that knowing when to work off site is key, but also knowing what type of work you can effectively do off site is also important.
Yeah, and we also schedule. We know what parts of our workflow requires more brain power and what doesn't, and so we schedule the stuff that requires more brain power in the morning times when we are more fresh, and because we can get through them, and it's a lot more enjoyable for us because we have more creativity, we have more energy in the morning time, and then some people are maybe different. You may get some people. They're energetic at nighttime. They're ready to rock and roll. They're really sluggish in the mornings. And so it all depends on your personality and just how to rearrange your workflow, and time block it. Put it literally in the calendar from here to here. I'm going to be doing this. From here to here, I'm doing this. I'm going to do this reactive thing here, but I'm going to do this proactive here. And schedule the reactive and the proactive stuff. So you're building your business and not just doing all reactive stuff. Because again, and this goes straight into the another point that we have, and this is a big one.
And actually, Rich, can just really quick before you get to the next point, because I think that something should be mentioned here. I'm glad that you actually bring up the distinction between, or at least developing a certain level of self-awareness between the times that you shouldn't be working off-site. And this is something, and in fact, all of the things that I comment on, I've lived personally and I'm working at or need to work at personally. So I'm speaking from personal experience here. But as much as I enjoy being out at a coffee shop, just to be around people, so I'm not on my own in the quiet of my apartment or whatever it may be. I also am reminded of how that affects my ability to focus and the level to which I can bring attention and energy to whatever the task is at hand. So as much as it is, again, you hear a lot of photographers talk about, or at least at times talk about how they can't handle being on their own or being in the quiet. That is a reality, and we're built to be around people in one form or another. But the reality is that if we're willing to maybe even spend the extra hour in the quiet in our home office, we could then take an additional half hour, and just set work aside altogether and go do something that would be enjoyable versus going to a coffee shop for 3 hours and getting maybe the same amount of work done that we would have at home in an hour.
Right.
So develop, and it is going to be different for everybody, but being honest with ourselves, developing a certain level of self-awareness as to when is the best time to be working offsite. I think that's a great conversation.
Right. Yeah.
All right. But please continue. Next point. I don't want to interrupt your flow.
Oh man.
Our flow.
So this is actually a pretty big one, especially for our personalities. I think for a lot of people's personalities is actually setting artificial deadlines. And what I mean by setting artificial deadlines is that, like, you have a real deadline that, like, for example, a client might email you and say, hey, I need something by tomorrow morning. Well, that's the deadline. You had to get it to them by tomorrow morning. And so for me, if I don't, I can set my deadline for tomorrow morning. And then I have now this task, I have 16 hours to get it finished, and I have, all this time to get it finished. And so I procrastinate. I have all this time on my hands, but if I make an artificial deadline, no one knows about it except me, that, hey, I'm going to, this task requires, an hour of my time. Then I give myself an hour of my time instead of 16 hours of my time. And because I only have this much time to actually get it done, then I am more focused. When I'm actually doing this task, I'm doing less stuff that doesn't matter and more stuff that does matter to actually get this task done, because I only have an hour to do it, not 16 hours. And so basically creating artificial deadlines really, really works for a lot of people, simply because just because, again, having just, hey, I have all day to get email done versus I'm going to have
that email done by 10 a.m.
Right. Then you are just more. I don't have all day. I got till 10 a.m. to do it, and you're way more focused, way more focused to get that task done.
Yeah, it's amazing how much quicker you work when you have a shorter amount of time, whether it's artificial or not. Although I do have to play a little devil's advocate here and ask: do you have in the back of your mind that deadline is artificial, and you're like, there is a level of discipline that has to happen as well. Again, yes, it is between you and you. Like, it's not between you and your client; it's between you and you. But again, in the back of my head, I can say, hey, I can get this thing done, and I can play a board game with my kids tonight. And spend time with my family tonight, or I can procrastinate. And I have, if I have 16 hours, I can watch a little Netflix. I can do this and do that. Pretty soon, kids, I don't have any time because I've got to work. You know what I'm saying? And so all of a sudden, and I've done that so many times. So I know, I'm definitely speaking from experience there. But all I know is that teaching my kids card tricks.
He has some really good card tricks that the kids' minds are blown. They're like, Dad, we didn't know you were a magician.
They had no idea. And so play Mancala, board games. My kids love that, and they love.
Did you say Mancala?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
What is that?
Alana will come and teach you. Okay,
she'll take you to school on this game.
She is so good at this game. So yeah, I mean, like it's an ancient game. You'd love it.
It's cool.
It's a really cool game. So
cool.
So yeah, I mean, like again, it all goes down to our values. It all really does. We make everything we do is we're motivated by our values of I want to have an incredible family. I want my family to know that I love them. Mm-hmm. I want my kids to grow up without a shadow of doubt that their dad like purposely made time for them and spent a lot of time with them and a lot of good quality time. Mm-hmm. Because again, I know we have a 10-year-old daughter, although in my mind, she's still a kid. In reality, I know that over half of my time with her is gone.
As far as her living at home.
Yeah. Time is limited. Mm-hmm. And it's a resource. Time is mm-hmm. Is a universal, is an equalizer. I don't mm-hmm. care if you are Jeff Bezos or Rich Smith, you can time is we have just the same amount of time, and we can never get it back. It's that resource is when it mm-hmm. It's gone, and so you can't replenish it. Just like any other resource we can. You want more money, you can go out and make more money. Any other resource you can get more of except time. And so with that. In mind, we make decisions that way. And so
another thing too about the artificial deadline is that you can exceed your client's expectations. That's another positive benefit from that.
Yep.
But just it's the mindset of not waiting until the last possible moment to fulfill a task or to get something done. I think it's just a cool trick that we can just tell ourselves, okay, we technically have this much time to do something. We'd rather get it done by, and that comes into play too with going on vacation. Technically, the client's not waiting on us for anything, but if we can get this to the client before we leave for vacation, that frees us up even more mm-hmm. mentally and emotionally to enjoy our time off. So it can come into play in lots of different ways,
Yeah, I actually thought of one while you were saying that. It's something I started implementing artificial deadlines because there are some things I do have deadlines on, like podcast episodes or whatever, but social media, I can schedule it whenever I want. And I remember I think I had been working for Nathan for maybe 2 months and I had appendicitis. And I remember I went to text him and all I could think about is, oh, he's going to be so mad at me because I'm going to have to ask him to do something because I hadn't finished it.
Terrible boss that I am.
But he was totally cool. He was the most supportive boss ever. But it was I hadn't created a graphic for social media the next day. And I was like, okay, it's midnight and I'm going to have to go into surgery here in a minute. And so I had a text drafted and my husband sent it to him at 6:00 in the morning. And it was, I don't have this podcast graphic drafted, but I'm about to go into surgery. Just wanted to let you know so you could create one if you wanted it to go up today. And I felt awful, but from that, I've started doing the artificial deadlines of every Thursday is my schedule out the next week of social media so that it is scheduled. And sometimes if I have enough images that are just I have to use this, it's 2 weeks of scheduling and then I don't have to do it the next week. So yeah, I really like that tip. I didn't even think about that one.
Yeah. Again, if you're constantly stressed out because you don't have good time management, then mm-hmm. I'm no good to my kids. I'm no good to my family if I'm mm-hmm. really, really stressed out. If I'm trying to eat dinner and my kids are asking me questions and having quality time, and all I'm thinking about is the stuff I've got to get done right after I finish my mm-hmm. last bite, then I'm no good. And so having good time management really, really helps with this being stressed. Because you have a plan. You have a plan in place. You know exactly what you're going to be doing and to schedule it. Because you scheduled it. So it's all good.
It's all good. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really great conversation, and I appreciate you guys sharing. When we were talking, I guess a few weeks ago, and found out that you weren't going to be able to be on the show, the first part of this series. Heather, you mentioned that you guys had a lot prepped, some good stuff you wanted to talk about, and you surely followed through on that. So I hope so.
I hope so. A lot of the stuff that we're sharing today has been such a process of, trial and error and making mistakes and learning from our mistakes. And so I hope that we never come across like we think we have it all together. These are just nuggets that hopefully can benefit someone that we've learned along the way from failures, Yeah,
so. Absolutely. Well, and I think the biggest takeaway today, and it's a great reminder, and it's been a theme on the podcast, so I'm glad that you brought it up again, is the significance of being very, very clear about your values. I'll just throw out this resource. I've mentioned it before. Tony Robbins wrote a book called Awaken the Giant Within. He rewrote it as an ebook, a much shorter version, only 100 pages. It's a free download. We'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. And you can download that, read it on your Kindle or as a PDF. Actually, I think now it's only available as a PDF. But regardless, one of the most valuable resources that you'll read probably ever, certainly this year. But one of the things he discusses in that ebook is the concept of values, what they mean, how to establish them. And if you don't have a very clear set of values, I literally have mine on the home screen of my phone. Mm-hmm. I was going to show you here. Let's see, notifications popped up. For those of you who are on the video, on the live, let's see if I can do this. Oh, notifications keep popping up. But the home screen, and this is just a good reminder for me, and it's something that I can literally do. Here we go. Something that I can literally do just at a glance is just to review the principles that for me ideally drive what I do consistently, day in and day out, not only on a personal level, but on a business level. Everything is driven by those things. And if you want to avoid, as Rich and Heather pointed out, stress and pain in your life, think about what brings you happiness and pleasure. Be very clear about those things, those big ideas, and then begin to very proactively and consistently live for the sake of those values. And it's amazing the kind of structure that it just naturally creates in your life. It helps guide decisions, minimize stress, and maximize efficiency. And so I love that you guys bring that up. We'll make sure, again, to link to that book in the show notes. Yeah. But thank you, Rich and Heather, for sharing. Thank you, Haylee, as well, for sharing and joining us. This has been another episode of Workflow Wednesday. We should be planning on being back next week. So I guess today is July 18th, July 25th. We'll be back with another episode of Workflow Wednesday. For those of you listening in on the podcast, you can watch these videos on Facebook Live. You just go to the facebook.com/photogsedit, PHOTOGSEDIT. And then for those of you that want to listen to the podcast, Bokeh Podcast, BOKEH podcast.com. Thank you guys so much. Have an absolutely lovely Wednesday.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.